Hi, I'm Jill Vitale-Awesome with the Eden Alternative. Thank you for joining us today for the Eden Alternative live show. I'm thrilled to have Sonya Barsness with us today, who is a revisionary gerontologist. We'll have Sonya explain what that is to you, and we're going to talk today about a lot of different things. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how the show came about, but I'd love for Sonya to introduce herself to all of you and tell you a little bit about her, and then we'll get started.
Thank you so much, Jill. I am so thrilled to be with you all today. I have just loved listening to the conversations you all have had. And I think anybody that knows me knows I love conversations, so especially difficult conversations. So I'm so thrilled. So I call myself a revisionary gerontologist. It is a self-proclaimed title that I decided was fitting to me. And so a revisionist is somebody that departs from and challenges established doctrine. And so in my work, as a gerontologist, I have felt like that's what I've been doing, is really challenging kind of our narrative and our paradigm of growing older and trying to create a new one. And it's in the spirit of critical gerontology also, which is actually a thing. It's a subset of gerontology. And critical gerontology is both about understanding the social construction of aging, but also changing it. So it has like a social justice kind of advocacy element to it. And I felt like that always was a good fit for what I do. So I'm a gerontologist. I have a consulting business, Sonya Barsness Consulting, and I have a blog, Being Heard. And I also teach at Georgetown University.
Awesome. Thank you for being with us. I have the great fortune of talking with Sonya kind of regularly. If too many months go by, one of us will email the other and say, we should talk. And every time I talk with Sonya, I think, gosh, I wish I could have recorded that conversation, because I think what you said about being a revisionary gerontologist and how you described critical gerontology?
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I had never heard that before, but it's such a great description. And, you are somebody that you really do push the tough conversations that need to happen. And that's actually how having you come and talk with us today actually really started is, it was maybe 4 weeks ago, I wrote a blog called Nursing Homes Need Support, Not Blame, because I was just devastated by knowing the people that work in this field, having been a nursing home administrator for a lot of years, knowing what they're going through this pandemic and seeing the incredibly painful media coverage. And so I wrote this whole blog about how we need to support nursing homes right now. And then Sonya, you wrote a follow-up blog. and I loved that. So talk a little bit about what that was, why you wrote it, and because it's kind of fascinating. I was kind of afraid to have the conversation with people right now about, yes, we need support, and you are fearless.
Well, I would say that I had fear. I, like many of us in this field, in this world, was just so devastated by what I was seeing and hearing about the pain that people living and working in nursing homes were experiencing, and the extraordinary acts, of courage and service. And I, talking to our colleagues, Karen Stobie and I would be talking, and we'd be like, oh, this is awful, Carmen, all these people that we know in our world. And I kept having these same feelings that I was like, there's no room for blame right now. It is not effective. It's not productive. And we know that something has to change, and this is like a light being shed on this. It's an opportunity for us to really take a look at what we have created as a system, and to really try to think about how we can do it differently so that it better serves the people that live and work in it.
And you used a really interesting word. You didn't say nursing homes need support, but they need to change. You used the word and. Why is that?
Because I think that it is it's a both and situation. I believe that the people who work in nursing homes themselves recognize that these systems are not supporting them or the people they care for. And the way I kind of think about it is like, we created this system, and I use the word we because I think that we collectively have all been a part of this. And we create this system that really is not serving the multidimensional needs of the people who are in it. And then we sort of said to the people who work in it, just make it work, you know? And I know, having worked in this system, that that's kind of the way we approach it, is like, let's make it work. And so we've forced it in a way, you know, and yet it's not serving people. And in many ways, it's actually failing people. And so I think that it's not that we can't use, I don't think the way to look at it as blame is helpful, but I do think that we have to see this as an opportunity to think and do differently.
Yes. And like you said, this is really shining a light on, and we're seeing this in, you know, the organizations we work with all over, is a crisis brings out where you're strong, and it also exposes all of the weak points you have, and the system is part of that, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's why when I read your blog, it did give me kind of the courage to really share my voice and to bring up this conversation, because I was very fearful that by bringing up the idea of change, of reminding us of culture change and our need to change, that people were going to perceive that as blaming.
Yes.
And saying that the people in the system are doing bad, the people in the system are doing wrong. And that is not at all what I would say. But I was really concerned about that, you know, that is this the right time to have this conversation?
Yeah. Well, that's a really big question. And I applaud you for having the guts to have that conversation while being very supportive of all of those who are here doing this work. So for those of you who are joining us, please pop in the comment box. We see a lot of folks out there who are joining us today, but pop in comments, questions. We have some very specific questions for the audience that we'd like you to respond to in a moment. And Sonya, I do want to ask you, you know, and is this the right time to bring this up? Who knows? It feels like it has to. It's an and situation.
Yes.
And, you know, the other thing is if we don't talk about these things right now, do we run the risk of just going back to the old normal, the status quo? And perhaps this is a time where with the spotlight being on our field, that this is the time to talk about it. So knowing that, you know, there is such an opportunity for us to do something different.
Yeah.
What can we do differently? You know, how can we do different? What are your thoughts on that?
I have lots of thoughts. You might be afraid that you asked this question, Jill. I mean, I've been thinking about this, not just recently, obviously, but for many, many years, like all of us have. I mean, the culture change movement has been going on for over 25 years. Eden has been a part of this movement for many years, you know, so I think we've all been thinking about this. And so it's giving us the time and the space to, in some ways, think about it. And I think, like you said, is this the right time? I think it is the right time to have these conversations, you know, and to really take a step back and pay attention and be curious and listen, you know, to what people are telling us. So I have a couple of different thoughts about this. So, I think a lot of times when we talk about culture change, we talk about it obviously moving from institutions to communities. And that continues to be, I think, something that we really have to think about. I think it's also more than that, you know, and I think the reason why it's more than that is because we have to find a way to build a system. And when I say system, I mean like all of the parts of this big thing that we have, you know, not just even nursing homes, assisted living, CCRCs, the whole kit and caboodle. I think we have to find a way to build it that is driven more by values. And we have already created many of these values. Eden has created these values. We have the domains of well-being. You know, Pioneer has created these values. Various entities have created values that speak to this. And so I think if we can sometimes take a step back and think about what it looks like to build a system based on some of those values, that will be a guiding force to us. Because I think what has sort of happened, I think, over the years is with good intentions, or at least benign intentions. Like, we have created a system that's been like Band-Aid after Band-Aid.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so difficult to unravel. So rather than just keep putting more Band-Aids on it, like you said, of doing same, or just putting a patch, I think we have to really take a step back and think about how to build it entirely differently.
So what are some things you would do? Like, where is the voice of the elders in a future? Talk a little bit about that.
So I think that's like fundamental, is that I think many of us recognize that for many reasons, we have created a system of supports and services that have not necessarily included the voices of people as they grow older and their individual multidimensional experiences of growing older. And that those voices do have to be the foundation that drives the way that we move forward. And it serves many different purposes. I mean, first of all, it should be built with us, for us, not to us, compromising voices of different ages and life experience. But I think that when we do that, what we see too is that aging is a multidimensional, individual, diverse experience. And so the system has to support that. It has to support that multidimensionality. It can't just be one thing. It doesn't work that way.
And, one of the things that this narrative is kind of doing, society's narrative, and maybe there's an opportunity for us to change this, is the whole narrative right now is that older people are frail, vulnerable. There is not really much out there about how do we all work together to solve this problem. It's all about, the professionals, the people who are still working are going to fix this for everybody else. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm a professional, you're a professional. I mean, I think we've all wanted to lend our experience, to creating something new, and that's important. And, my foundation is academically in gerontology. I mean, I was trained in gerontology. However, pretty much everything I've really learned has been listening, to people who are growing older and those that are working closest to them. And so I think that, we need both. We need all of those perspectives at the table, but we do have to really listen. And I will say too, when we listen to people and what's important to them, what type of life they want, we also have to be prepared as professionals to kind of get out of our way and to recognize there are things that people want that we don't think is good for them, that we don't think is best for them. And that is a part of creating this new model, this system, is being okay with that, of this element of risk and autonomy that is so fundamental to many things that we've already talked about in culture change.
And as someone, as a leader, a formal leader in an organization, you have to give up some control too, and recognize that you get much better outcomes when you include people, even though it can take, the more people you involve, the longer it takes, but you get better outcomes. So you talked a little bit about, about including the voices of older people. I know something else that's really important to you, and not just older people, but people needing assistance or support. Reciprocity is another big area that you talk about.
I've been thinking about this idea so much lately because of lots of the conversations that have been coming up about this idea of kind of helping the poor old people, and, I think there's such a missed opportunity on so many levels sometimes that we do not see the people that are living in care communities as assets, and that, in some ways I feel like these are living almost like museums, almost, of amazing artifacts of our society that are living to tell us the story of who we are. And they have so much that they contribute and can be enabled to do that. Yet that's not the way the system is set up. So if we could build something that is based on this idea of enabling people to be an active, equal member of our society, not those people, equal.
Citizens.
I love that term because I think that it represents it. These are our fellow neighbors.
Yes.
These are not others.
Absolutely. And we have oh my goodness, you are quite a draw. We have a lot of people here watching this. And let's see some of the recent comments. Let's see. Oh, Denise said, getting past our assumptions and judgments is so tough, especially when we have been deeply trained in how to solve others' problems.
Yes. I think that's so true. And I think many of us have, I mean, I came from that thinking and training, and it is tough, to change our assumptions. And I feel like a large part of it is really just spending time with people of all different generations and listening to each other and I guess honoring our differences.
Absolutely. So, okay. So I'm looking at this as like your big five, and we talked about this before, right? The voices of those that we are supporting, whatever term is that a good term to use, do you think?
That's what I use. I mean, that's what I use, but yes, it's always evolving.
Reciprocity is number two. What about, you also mentioned, how does care support people to live rather than care being the only goal? And says care is helping another person to grow. So talk a little bit about that, if you would.
So I love talking about this, and it's something I think that maybe it's kind of the overarching, I guess, even concept in all of this is this idea of focusing on living. And I know I've talked about this with Carmen and different webinars with Action Pact, of this idea of moving to a place where living is our goal rather than care being the end in itself. And I think we all can identify with this, having worked in care communities, is that it becomes that sometimes, is that the care is actually the goal. And so the way I think about it is like, if living is the goal, and if I'm living in a care community, and nature is very important to me, I need to be in nature, I need to be outside. If living is nature for me, the things that have to, be done to support me are still there. They still exist, and they exist now to support me so that I can be in touch with nature, as opposed to, just care for the sake of care. And so I'm not diminishing the importance of care. It's just that I think it has to serve a bigger goal.
Yes.
And I remember I was in a nursing home and I was talking to some residents, and one of the women said to me, when I moved in here, everyone asked me all of these questions, medical questions. Not one person asked me how I want to live. And it struck me, like, it just has stayed with me all these years because it's so true. So what if we asked that to people? That was our big question. How do you want to live, Jill?
Yeah. Well, and I think, as you're saying this, I'm thinking about, that's what our society's talking about right now. And and we've talked before about, the value of, having simulations. What does it feel like to have dementia? What does it feel like to be old? We are all living, we have our own thoughts on it, right? But we are living right now, and everything is focused on our healthcare needs and all the things that you need to do to stay healthy. And yet we're all saying, but I want my life. And so, there's a great opportunity for us to reflect right now when you have a life that is only about preventing illness or decline. We're getting a big lesson in this right now, aren't we?
That's a great point. And I think, like you said, if we can draw on our own experiences right now on that, it does feel like everything is revolved around kind of this avoidance of, negative outcomes right now, right? And, that's necessary. But it also, but it is like, it brings us to that question of like, what does it mean to live? And that's a tough question. I mean, that's a tough question for anyone to answer, but even to operationalize that question of how do we get to that nitty gritty of what that means to somebody?
Yeah. And so let's see. Tracy is here. Gender. I often say that gerontology is the study of living because aging is about living. Care is one aspect of living, but not the only goal. That's a very good point.
And it changes the conversation in so many ways, because I think when we talk about things just as aging, we bring all the baggage of what that means, but when we normalize it, it changes the conversation.
Absolutely. There's a question from Denise. What about the focus on mitigating risk from the provider perspective and the families that want surplus safety for their loved ones? How do we move forward and really create something new? And that ties really, that's a really great question about that whole concept of living being the most important thing. Any thoughts?
It's such a great question, and it's such a complicated question, right, on so many levels. And the first thing that comes to mind is that is a part of like what I think I mean by we have to change this, is because we all have to look inside ourselves and think about what it really looks like to have this new system that is based on these values. And that does mean, that again, there is risk. There's these different elements that we have a discomfort, and it's rooted in paternalism and ageism and all these different things, right? And then I think it is being, just realistic about, how we approach these conversations. And I mean, something I've always noticed is that we do have to take responsibility at times about how we promote the idea of long-term care broadly to people as like essentially being a bubble for people to live in which nothing will happen to them. And that's a very unrealistic expectation for anybody.
Yeah.
And, I think we have to be honest and really be self-critical in a way, not in a blaming way, but just like be open to ourselves about how we inadvertently create this paradigm.
And that brings me to your fourth, Sonya's big five, is to own nursing homes and senior living communities as part of our communities.
Yes. As I was watching everything happening with this virus, and I just had a feeling, and maybe this is a little bit of like a jaded type of, but that there was like this feeling that the nursing homes are over there, like it's those people, and yet they're in our communities. I mean, they're around the corner from us. They belong to us. And this is not new, but it again shed light on this, is that, care communities are a part of our community. They are our neighbors. These are people that live in our community. And we, I think, need to have ownership of that and to be outraged as members of a community. I mean, if we saw something in our communities that was happening, to our neighbors, we would want to do best, we would want to change. We would be fired up about it. And so I feel like we have to take ownership of that and also recognize that, again, we want to know those people living in care communities. We want to see them as individuals. Not just as nursing home residents, not just as older people, but as our neighbors.
Well, and that brings up a really good point. So, when you know your neighbors, you care about them. You're exactly. Not like I'm looking out my window right now. If my neighbor, and I'm not saying this is true, but if my neighbor hasn't mown their lawn in the last month,
right?
And I don't know that person, I'm going to be like, ugh. But if I know that person, I'm going to say, hey, is everything okay? What's going on? Can I help you? And that's what we've seen with a lot of the communities we work with, is those that have made an effort on both sides, the outside community as well as the nursing home or assisted living community, for people to be well known to each other, to be an integral part of the community. They are just naturally getting the support from the folks that surround them, and they aren't necessarily having the bashing of, in the media and people writing nasty comments. It's people saying, how can we help you? So that makes I think we're seeing that play out right now.
I think so, in a different way. And I'm glad that there is more recognition of the people that work in nursing homes too, and other types of care communities, to that same point, is those people are a part of our communities too. And so we should care, that they are not getting what they need to do their jobs. If, that the system is not supporting them, that they're not, all those different things. We should be caring for them as our neighbors as well. And I think, like you said, in places where that's true, where the community is opened, it's truly integrated, that those people are embraced as a part of the community that are working in long-term care. Yes,
absolutely. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's there's so many lessons to be learned here. So your fifth. So I want to recap this a little bit, right? You talked about having the voices of those who are older or receiving support, having reciprocity, making sure care supports life. And we talked about integrating and making sure that people who live in these communities are part of society and part of the community. And your last one, you talked about human connection, seeing people as whole human beings. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So this conversation we've been having about social isolation has been obviously happening for some time, but it's been again elevated. And I prefer to think about it in terms of social connection and social disconnection. And I personally believe that this is a social problem. It's a society-wide problem for people of all ages, okay, that we are just disconnected. And so when we talk about it in terms of care communities, I think we have to recognize that the idea of social isolation and loneliness, it's much bigger than that. It is truly about human connection. It's about developing relationships, developing communities. So it ties into many of the other things that we're talking about. But I think it's so fundamental that we recognize that how incredibly important that is to building a community. And, you know, as you were talking, it was making me think too of like in your own neighborhood, in your own community. So I've now lived in 2 places recently where I haven't felt a sense of community as much because I either wasn't there very long or it was just the nature of the community. And I felt so disconnected, you know, and it's impossible to build a community without human connection. That's not possible. And in order to do that, you have to see people as whole people. You have to see them for everything about them, not just their age, not just their diagnosis. You have to see them. And I think that's what we're talking about, is building something that works for everyone because we see each other as humans. It's, you know, the idea of shared humanity.
Absolutely. And Kim McRae had a great comment. Maybe long-term care needs to start a "Won't You Be My Neighbor" campaign with Tom Hanks. If you're watching, we could use your help with this. Great idea. So we have some questions for our audience. And so many of you have been putting in comments, and I do want to pull up Lisa Kendall's comment really quickly. The Eden Alternative says, medical treatment should be the servant of genuine human caring, never its master. To me, this means life first ahead of medical needs. Care as anything that helps another to grow. Yeah, Lisa. So questions we have for all of you. Please put things in the chat or in the comment box. Sonya talked about her 5 things that she thinks should change. What's another value you think we need to drive change? What other things do you think we need to build upon to create a new future? Start putting stuff in the chat box. And Imelda put in a comment while we're waiting for some of these. I think a mantra we would appreciate here is nothing about us without us. Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
And I'll add to that too, you know, we honestly don't even have the systems to really do that. You know, I mean, that's a part of this, is that we can say like we need to hear the voices of people as they grow older and as they need support, but we haven't even at a very tactical level, really, I don't think fully explored what that looks like. And so that's a part of this too. I'm actually a very applied person in many ways, so I like to think about things, but I also like to bring it down to the level of like, well, how do we do this? And with all of these ideas, I think that's what the next steps of these conversations is. What does that look like to really listen to people, to actively cultivate, their voices?
And have that as a very intentional part of everything you do, right? So that if say I'm working in a community, say I'm the administrator of a community or whatever, that if I'm not getting it, somebody else is saying, hold on a minute. Are we practicing this value? So we've got some other things in here. Chris Angevine says that personal choice should be another one of the values. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, absolutely. And I think that goes to the individuality and multidimensionality of what that means in terms of what's important to each of us. And, you know, so I think this is a great example, actually, of how we've made lots of great strides in trying to actively find ways to get personal choice, but it also can become institutionalized in a way, by just kind of like I remember Kim van Heidsma had, she's done such great work with Pally, and she had this interesting study where she took a couple of her questions with Pally, which is essentially an assessment, tool of how to get personal choice from people living in care communities. And she, when she looked at a couple of the questions, the complexity of the additional questions and conversations that you had to have to be able to truly understand what is important to people was mind-boggling and so important. So we have to, I think, be willing to go to those levels of detail too of personal choice that, I might say right now that this is important to me and this is my choice, but that might change. I have a right to change my mind. I might feel different ways and different days like anybody would.
Yes, I see what you mean with we even institutionalize that. Yeah. Well, you said you wanted to get up at this time and have this breakfast 3 years ago when you moved in. We're on your choice that you made, and you have to commit to it for the rest of your life. Yeah, that's interesting. Al says a human rights angle.
Oh, yeah. I know. I mean, Al and I have talked about this, so I can, I think, speak to from partially his perspective from what I can articulate, not as well as he could, I'm sure, but that a lot of what we are talking about is a human rights angle, because in many ways, the system that we have created is not driven by a full living of human rights. And especially when you think about people with dementia, for example, we have created systems that are really limiting rights, actually. And if we look at it from a human rights angle, I think it is very helpful for us to understand, what any human being deserves. And it always struck me as something that I think many of us forget is it's literally in even nursing home law that any person living in a nursing home has the same rights as any citizen of the United States. And so when you really think about that, that is, it's a little bit inching towards this human rights angle in terms of, what is a person deserving as a human being? How do we want to live as human beings?
That is so powerful. And the fact that it's right there that people that live in nursing homes have the rights of every other citizen of our country, and somehow we sometimes use regulations to not let that happen. You know what I mean? I know I did as a nursing home administrator. When I look back, it's like, ooh, some of the things.
And I think we can think of many examples of it, and I'm not trying to be contentious specifically or open this conversation necessarily, but when you think about like with people with dementia and, secured units, for any other segment of the population, that would raise questions about whether that's a human rights violation.
Yes.
And so when we put that angle on it and its perspective, I think it very much changes the conversation.
Absolutely. Sandy Place says, respect for all of the ways we live and work, treating each other with this underlying feeling of respect for personhood and contribution of another. She put that beautifully.
Yes, that is beautifully. And I think this concept of personhood is something that, we in our world, in our lives, we don't usually use that term, but it's such a powerful term to think about. Who am I as a human being? Who am I as a person? How do I maintain that throughout my life? And then I think the threats to it, I think that's what's the important part of this conversation is how do we sometimes inadvertently threaten personhood? And how can we enable people to be their fully actualized selves, which they are entirely capable of doing throughout their lives.
Right.
Probably more so than I am. So yeah.
Absolutely. And Imelda says, Atul Gawande's book, Being Mortal, lays out the values that are being articulated right here. And that's from a physician who sees the whole person. Yeah, and I'm sure you read that book, Being Mortal. If anybody out there has not, highly recommend reading that book. I think Sonya might have frozen up here. We will wait till she comes back, and I'll keep reading out some of these comments. And she's coming back. Chris Angevine says, make sure there are opportunities to give and receive. And that goes back to that reciprocity that Sonya was talking about. Ray says, more respect that our elders are still vital and important to our communities. Even if they have cognitive difficulties, their wisdom is extremely important. And we still don't have Sonya back, so you guys are stuck with me until she comes back. Kathy says resident rights are human rights. Let me see here. Sorry about that. Lisa Kendall, our common humanity shared in a supportive environment can help heal the wounds we carry from earlier in life. I would add trauma-informed environment in service of this goal. And Ray says, I'm concerned that care partners need to be seen as a huge part of our future. Their role is critical to the longevity of our society. They need to be recognized monetarily and acknowledge that their jobs are important, valued, and worthy. How can we draw others to this profession? And while we are waiting for Sonya, I want to comment a little bit on that. Before we started the show today, Sonya and I were talking about the worries that we both have about what's happening right now during this pandemic, and the fact that we have team members, and that includes people that lead communities, because sometimes they kind of even get a worse rap. But just the fact that so many people are being traumatized by working through this pandemic, trying to protect older people, and then the common narrative right now is one of blame and kind of demonizing those who work in the field. And just the concern that we are going to lose people who end up. You're back.
I'm back. Sorry, I don't know exactly what happened. We have sort of a tropical storm going on here, so.
I'm so glad you're back, and I bet everybody else is too. So if you could join in on this. We were talking about Ray's comment about care partners, right? And I had started to share that what we were talking about before the show, how we were concerned about the trauma that people are going through, not just fighting the virus and all this, but then the stigma from society. And we were talking about losing people who get burned out, really the trauma they're going through, and also the additional stigma that this is casting on our field at a time when we need more people to work in this field because we have an aging population than less. So again, I'm so glad you're back to talk about this, because it's really boring with me going on about it. So talk a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Sure. So first, on one hand, it's all these both ends, right? So on one hand, I feel like this is another kind of symptom of the fact that the system is sort of failing the people that work in it, is that they don't, that they feel stigmatized, that they feel, unsupported by the system. So I feel like on one hand, it gives us more evidence that the system has to change, because clearly these people are doing extraordinary things every day, and the system is not there for them, really. Then on the other hand, I have like this optimistic view where I feel like right now there's so much positive attention being paid to people that work in healthcare, and them being seen for who they are in terms of their extraordinary sacrifices and love. And so I also have this belief that this may actually inspire a whole new generation of people to join the field, and to see this as an amazing opportunity to share and to serve. And I feel like within that is a caveat of what we can do to further that, and to support and to kind of promote that idea.
So people who are watching right now, what can they do? And Mel had a really great comment that, as Dr. Thomas says, this is sacred work being done by the folks that work in these communities. So whether somebody, works in a care setting, or they don't have a job in this field, what can we do to change that, do you think?
I think, yeah. So it's a great question. A couple of thoughts are that in some ways, so on one hand, in terms of allowing and enabling, deeper relationships to happen amongst people of different generations. So facilitating that so that people see each other and they're interested in each other and not so closed off from each other in society. So I think that's one part of it. I think, also there could be all sorts of creative ways that we really highlight, the work of people right now in nursing homes and share their stories and share all the wonderful things that they're doing, so that society, our communities, can see them and see the amazing stuff that they do. I think that unfortunately there is a lot of stigma about working in nursing homes at times, and assisted living in any care community. And in any way that we can show, the real opportunities in this work, not just even from like a healthcare skills perspective, but the opportunities to build deep relationships with people, that I think is so unique to our field.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you just don't get that opportunity in any other field. And we do. And through some of these other shows that we've had, we had Ecligo, who they do workforce recruiting for our field. And, right now they were talking about this, it's a sad situation that so many people have lost their jobs in hospitality and other fields, but and this is an amazing opportunity to introduce people to just the meaning that's behind this. If you've read the book Drive, it's all research based, what motivates people, autonomy, which we work with people through the alternative so that people are empowered to work there. Mastery, which is learning new things and the opportunity to get even better at your job, and purpose. And our field has purpose like baked into it. If we can help people see that. And Chris said, Chris Angevine, people in the field are truly warriors with this pandemic, and we need to show them the money, right? And that's another thing too, is, on an earlier show where we talked about ageism, Ashton Applewhite popped in a comment and it said, in a society that doesn't value older people, they don't value those that support them and work with them. So there's this whole thing of, the policy behind and reimbursement, and how we view older people. And partly going back to what you said about, do we see people as whole people that are our neighbors? We might think differently about policy and reimbursement and making sure that the money is there. I also want to point out, we do these weekly calls where we involve people from all over the country. And one of the groups, somebody that's been joining us is Jackie from Park Springs. And so Park Springs is the life plan community where they put out a call and said, hey, who wants to volunteer to come live at this community? So that we keep COVID out. And they had 70 people say, yeah, I'll do it. And she said, I think it was her, that the team members don't want to be called heroes. They're warriors. And we're like, oh, I love that. And they're actually coming on our show on June 1st to talk more about that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's like I have many dreams, but like one of my dreams is, like I know that when I'm in the grocery store and I see someone in like nursing, scrubs or uniform, I get so excited about seeing them, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, thank you. I mean, imagine if these professions, these vocations did become this symbol of people in our society that we do need to revere and treat differently. I think that the money piece will come with that, and it'll all kind of, and it is, I mean, absolutely. I mean, there's so many different aspects of this change that we're not even, of course, addressing in terms of the reimbursement systems and the survey systems and all the pieces of it that we know have to change. But I also feel like that's why it's important to start in this place that we're talking about today, Jill, because if we just throw money at the same system, it's not going to change.
Right. Absolutely. And Kim McGray popped in and said, and long-term care staff are worthy of getting PPE that they need.
Yes,
too, right?
Absolutely.
But you're right. Just throwing money at it isn't going to solve anything. We have to change the system too. So audience, what other lessons have we learned that will help us move forward? And there's a little bit of a lag in comments coming in. But what other lessons have we learned that will help us move forward? And while we're waiting for that, and I just want to point out, it is Park Springs that said, they asked their team members, do you want to be called heroes? And they said, no, we are warriors, which is even more powerful, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, Tracy Doran said, I think it would be amazing to have a group of caregivers that work similarly to Red Cross volunteers. When we have pandemics or some other disaster, there's a group of people willing to fill in where needed to fill the gaps. That's kind of an interesting idea.
Yeah, I love that idea. And I think it goes, to what we were talking about too, is if we take ownership of care communities as being a part of our community, I think that would be a natural response for people to volunteer and to want to help out, that it wouldn't be so off of our radar. I mean, I really, really believe that if care communities are more on the radar of other people, not us in our world who work in this, but our community at large, that it would be different. People would be willing to be a part of that.
Yes. And Carmen had, and this comes from your blog too, you talked about this. So Carmen says something that we've learned that can help us move forward is that change can happen, and it can happen really fast. Yes. Right? Weren't you and Karen having that discussion?
Yep. I mean, Karen was the one that brought up is people are changing right now. People are having to change. They're having to make this system work. And it's evidence that we can. I mean, we can even take a step back and to look at what helped us get through this, what helped us change, what was successful, what were the qualities, that helped us. I mean, that is a part of, I think, traditional culture change coaching and appreciative inquiry and all these different models we use is really focusing on what we're doing well and replicating that. And I think we're seeing that now is that we have this capacity for change and we can do it.
Yes. When we had Bob Kramer come on the show from Nexus Insights, and he was talking about all these things that he thought were going to take forever, like telehealth, like poof, it happened, right? And we are changing very quickly. Yep. And so, we think we can't change, but we are right now. And that's such an important lesson to take away. So other things that people commented on that we've learned that will be important is that privacy is a human right. Really good
one.
Kathy says we need to involve all stakeholders in changing the system.
Yes.
Kyrie, what is good for elders is good for all of us.
Yes.
I have learned so much about self-care from the elders I've spent time with.
Oh my goodness. And I know Emmy Kyoto she really made me start thinking about this when the virus started, about how we really need to be actively asking, older people with lots of life experience in our society about how to get through this. I mean, they they've been through so many things. Why aren't we asking them? Why aren't they a part of this conversation? And I was like, she's right. I mean, in all of her work with Abasho, it's been the elders have been central to the healing.
Yes. And Al says, we throw around terms like person-centered or person-directed care, but this pandemic challenges us to understand it like we've never had to before. The upside is doing so will make our impact so much more fulfilling down the road.
I totally agree. And I think it is. I mean, all of this is an evolution. And I do feel like that's the beauty of this work that we're doing, is that this is a dynamic process that evolves continually, and it has to be. The system has to be dynamic. Our conversations have to be dynamic. We have to be willing, like Kathy said, to listen to all the stakeholders, to have them at the table. Even if we don't entirely agree all the time, we have to come to common ground, and we have to figure ways to move forward with some shared values.
Absolutely. Mel said something interesting. Families should be considered essential workers.
Oh, wow. That's real. I mean, I don't know if Mel, if you want to type in more about that, what you mean by that.
Well, and so somebody that was on our weekly calls was sharing that there was an elder that had significant weight loss, and they determined, and the daughter had always been there helping and being a part of it, and her mom wouldn't eat anymore, and they designated her as an essential worker so she could come in, because it was essential for mom's survival and health. So I don't know if that is what she is meaning, but probably that the relationships are such an important part of being a care partner, right? You having your family there is so important.
And it makes me think of, another thing that we've been talking about is this idea too. One of the things that the virus is teaching us is the focus on the spirit, and how incredibly important that is, sometimes more so than the physical, than the medical, many times more so. And that, I think the decisions that we need to make at times need to be more considerate of that, of the need for the spirit to also have at least equal footing, if not more.
Yes. And a couple people, I think Denise and Kim McRae, talked about something they've learned, is that silos hold back everything. Mm-hmm. And we are, we're seeing that so much, and people actually enjoying it. Well, just because you have this certain job description, you're doing everything right now. And people are being creative, and they're coming together and working toward the common good. And hopefully, and we've heard that from some people too, that corporate office folks are much more engaged with the everyday of what's going on in the community, and know exactly what's going on with the folks that are direct care partners. And, the hope is that, okay, this is over. Let's go back to, you're in the dining department. Yeah. I work at the corporate office. You're here. That doesn't happen.
But I think that's really true. It's like we're having to be everything in many different ways. And then I think about it too in a different way of how, kind of going like full circle to what we were talking about nursing homes kind of being at the forefront, and therefore everyone's, they were siloed. They have been siloed. Is this like, I don't have to worry about that until I'm in one, or someone I know is in one, right? Now we're seeing it in newspapers every day, and the conversations are not always the best conversations, but what it is doing is bringing attention, to this world. And it reminds me of some of the work that we've done in trying to promote culture change amongst citizens, and kind of inspiring citizens to be a part of the change. And so many people just don't even know that there's an option for something to be different. And I think, again, this is our opportunity now, is to create awareness of that the way the systems have been in nursing homes does not have to be the way it will be. We can change. That's possible. And so we might know that, but maybe not all of society knows that. And so if we can break down those silos so that it's not just those people or them, that it's us, and that we can change.
So I was talking more micro, and you're talking macro, which is one of the amazing things about you. Yeah.
Both are necessary.
Right, the silos in society as well.
Yeah.
Lisa says everyone chipping in and helping where they can feels like a real family. Mm-hmm. Bridget says a multifunctional team creates synergy and resilience in the corporate community, and they're more adaptable to change.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely true.
So I can't believe we've been talking for 54 minutes because time flies.
I know.
It really does. And for once, we actually have a recording of our conversation, which we've always wanted to have.
Unbelievable.
So are there any, and I hope you'll come back and talk.
Oh my gosh, I'd love to. Thank you. It's an honor.
People that are here want that to happen too. Any final words that you would want to leave people with?
I think, that I think we just have to keep this conversation alive. I really, really feel like this is an opportunity right now. With all of the tragedy we're seeing, it's also an opportunity for us to really move forward, to think differently, and to learn. And so I just encourage all of us to pay, to actively cultivate, these lessons, to ask people about their experiences, and to find ways to come together that we can share this so that we can build something new.
Awesome. Well, I am inspired by your words today. And thank you for joining us. Thank you to our audience. We had so many people here who were participating. I wish we had time to pull up all of the comments. And I hope people will go back and read those comments later because there's so many great insights. So next Monday is Memorial Day, so we won't be having a show. But on June 1st, we have the folks from Park Springs Life Plan Community, and they'll be talking about how they got to the place where 70 of their team members ended up living on site and how they're staying there through, I think it's June 15th, to keep COVID out of the community. They've got a really great story, and we're excited to talk with them. On June 8th, we have Sister Imelda Maurer, Sarah Rowan, and Verna Cavey, who are three amazingly brilliant women with so much wisdom to share with the rest of the world. And on June 15th, we have Dr. Roger Landry from Masterpiece Living who will be joining us. So we've got a great lineup coming. Sonya, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Jill, for having me. And I always love chatting with you and everyone here. It does truly feel like this is a community, and I appreciate that.
And how can people get in touch with you? I'm sorry. I should have. Gosh.
No. So you can go to you can email me. We can put that up. I'm totally fine with having that up there. You can go to my blog, beingheard.blog. And I also failed to mention, I'm trying to start this effort to create a space for the stories of people living in care communities that have died as a result of the virus. And so I've created a site where family members and people working in care communities can post stories of the people that they have supported and cared for, so that we can ensure that those people are seen. It's been thousands and thousands of people, as we know, that have died, and I want to make sure that their stories are told. And so the site is Being Seen, that space. And so please share and encourage people to submit stories there. And also through there, you can find other ways to contact me as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you so much.